2,000 years after his death, Caligula is remembered universally as a monster. The historical consensus tells us he was a raving megalomaniac who demanded worship as a living god and eagerly drained the Roman treasury to fund his bizarre fantasies. After his assassination, the Roman state subjected him to a process called damnatio memoriae, a systematic physical erasure of his legacy. His statues were violently toppled, his name was chiseled out of public inscriptions, and his finely sculpted portraits were meticulously recarved to look like other emperors. Obliterating this physical evidence left a massive blank space in the historical record. Without material reminders of his administrative reign, his political enemies easily rushed in to fill the void with their own lurid narratives. The men who wrote his history, authors like Suetonius, Seneca, and Cassius Dio, belonged entirely to the senatorial and equestrian classes. This was the exact demographic that Caligula had spent his 4-year reign actively targeting and humiliating. We are evaluating a contaminated crime scene. The enduring picture of Caligula the madman relies almost entirely on the unchallenged written testimony of the exact people who conspired to murder him. Caligula grew up as a hostage. Following the suspicious death of his father, the young prince was summoned to the isolated island of Capri to live under the thumb of the emperor Tiberius, the very man orchestrating the destruction of his family. The Roman Senate remained entirely complicit in this purge. Politicians eagerly drafted the legal condemnations that allowed Tiberius to imprison and starve Caligula's mother and older brothers to death. He miraculously survived to take the throne in 37 AD to ecstatic public celebration. But a few months into his reign, he was struck by a severe, near-fatal illness characterized by extreme fever and delirium. Modern observers often retrospectively diagnose this illness as brain inflammation or lead poisoning to explain his subsequent cruelty. The brutal political reality of the Roman court provides a much simpler explanation. Facing his own mortality, Caligula realized he had no direct heir and was surrounded by ambitious rivals. He immediately ordered the executions of high-profile figures, including his cousin and his powerful father-in-law. These were brutally calculated, preemptive strikes executed by a traumatized survivor securing his autocracy against immediate threats. Hostile biographers routinely claim Caligula bankrupted the Roman state on insane vanity projects. They point to his order to lash merchant ships together into a 3-mile pontoon bridge across the Bay of Baiae so he could ride a horse across it. Modern military logisticians view this differently. It was an awe-inspiring display of engineering, likely serving as a logistical rehearsal for a planned invasion of Britain and designed to overawe foreign hostages. Suetonius claimed Caligula executed his cousin, Ptolemy of Mauritania, purely out of petty jealousy over the splendor of Ptolemy's purple cloak. The facts show Ptolemy was an incredibly wealthy, independent client king. His execution was a rational geopolitical strike to eliminate a rival bloodline and directly annex the vast resources of Mauritania into the Roman provincial system. Curious, this animated diagram shows the structure of the Roman Republic, highlighting the position of consul at the absolute peak of political power. This brings us to the most famous proof of Caligula's alleged psychosis, the claim he planned to appoint his favorite horse to this exact position. By suggesting a stabled animal could easily perform the duties of the highest republican magistracy, Caligula was delivering a piece of biting, humiliating political satire. He was telling the senators to their faces that they were so completely politically impotent, they were indistinguishable from a horse. His predecessors had carefully maintained the polite fiction that the Senate still held legislative authority. Caligula used deliberate, erratic performances to tear away that facade and force the aristocracy to face the reality of his absolute, unchecked rule. The physical evidence that escaped the state's erasure firmly supports this view. A forensic look at his surviving coinage reveals a meticulously calculated program of dynastic messaging, featuring highly unusual public elevations of his sisters as symbols of state security and fortune. Roman bronze coins traditionally bore the letters SC, indicating they were minted by decree of the Senate. Rare issues from Caligula conspicuously lack this inscription. He used mass communication to openly acknowledge that his power rested squarely on military force, entirely bypassing legislative approval. The discovery of two massive vessels at the bottom of Lake Nemi confirmed he possessed immense engineering capabilities. Measuring roughly 70 meters long, these enormous floating palaces featured marble decks, hot baths, and highly advanced technological mechanisms like ball bearings and sophisticated pumps. Suetonius claimed the emperor sacrilegiously extended his residence down the Palatine Hill, physically incorporating the temple of Castor and Pollux as his front door. For decades, historians dismissed this as a malicious fabrication designed to highlight his megalomania. Then, excavations by Oxford and Stanford universities found the physical foundations directly linking his luxury complex to the rear of the temple. The archaeology completely validates the texts, but disproves the madness. Caligula was a highly capable autocrat, intentionally dominating the spatial footprint of Rome, aggressively blurring the lines between mortal residence and divine sanctuary. In January 41 AD, Caligula entered a cryptoporticus, a narrow underground corridor beneath his palace. Isolated from his loyal German bodyguards, he was ambushed and stabbed over 30 times by senior officers of his own Praetorian Guard. Ancient sources often framed the assassins as noble defenders of the Republic. The primary architect of the murder, veteran tribune Cassius Dio, had a deeply personal motive. Caligula relentlessly mocked Chiara's high-pitched voice and forced the hardened soldier to use sexually explicit passwords in front of his troops. The conspiracy was a settling of personal scores, and it was entirely ruthless. The assassins hunted down and murdered Caligula's wife, Melonia Sasonia, and smashed the head of his infant daughter against a stone wall to ensure his dynastic line was completely extinguished. He engaged in a relentless psychological war of dominance and humiliation against the Roman military and elite. His violent death was the direct, predictable outcome of pushing those groups into a corner. Upon hearing of the emperor's death, the Roman consuls rushed to convene the Senate on the Capitoline Hill. They delivered rousing speeches celebrating the return of liberty, condemning tyranny, and declaring the official restoration of the Republic. While the Senate debated constitutional theory, the actual mechanics of power played out in the palace. The Praetorian Guard knew their lucrative employment relied entirely on the existence of an emperor. Scouring the grounds, they found Caligula's terrified, stuttering uncle, Claudius, hiding behind a curtain. Recognizing his royal bloodline, the military whisked Claudius away to their camp and proclaimed him the new ruler. Claudius permanently shattered the senatorial illusion of control by simply purchasing the loyalty of the guard with a donative, a massive cash payment of 15,000 sesterces per man. The Senate indignantly demanded that Claudius submit to their authority. Lacking any reliable military backing within the city to enforce their words, they were immediately forced to capitulate and formally recognize Claudius as the absolute monarch. His unforgivable crime was refusing the polite game of Roman politics. He forced the aristocracy to look into a mirror and see their total subservience. Because they could not defeat him in life, the Roman elite smashed that mirror and picked up their pens and weaponized history to turn a brutally rational autocrat into a two-dimensional monster.